Incoming transmission.
Hello, this is Matt and McKinley from History Dispatches.
We are the father-son duo bringing you the weird, the wild, the wacky, and the craziest tales from across time.
From the Ice Bowl
to the Great Heathen Army.
And the head of Oliver Cromwell.
The same head they kept on a pike for 3 years?
Yep, all here on History Dispatches.
New episodes every weekday.
Find out more at historydispatches.com or wherever you get your podcast app.
Welcome to True Spies, the podcast that takes you deep inside the greatest secret missions of all time.
Suddenly out of the darkness appeared Bin Laden.
You'll meet the people who live life undercover. What do they know? What are their skills? And what would you do in their position?
Vengeance felt good. Seeing these people pay for what they'd done felt righteous.
True Spies from Spyscape Studios, wherever you get your podcasts.
Hello, and thank you for listening to The History of World War II podcast, episode 530, Operation Mars. Returning to Army Group South, we saw Stalingrad not only saved, but swallowed up by Operation Uranus, as was General Paulus's Sixth Army, with Soviet forces coming around each side of the great city. With its success, the Stavka had wanted to quickly move on, as they had their collective eye on Rostov-on-Don. But this time, it was Stalin who had his fair share of overambitious mistakes, pulling them back. Instead, it would be Operation Little Saturn, which would see another Soviet pincer move, this one starting even further out, as it was guessed. The Germans would try something to save the Sixth Army, which was General Manstein's Operation Winter Storm. And knowing that Axis forces of whatever size would be rushing at Stalingrad, it only made sense to try to enclose this rescue operation as well. Failure, like success, builds on itself. But before covering what Operation Little Saturn achieved, and then made possible for the Stavka later on, the sister Operation to Uranus, Operation Mars, the plan to encircle General Walter Model's Ninth Army of Army Group Center, needs its time in the sun. For not only are there myths surrounding this great undertaking that need to be clarified, but its results checked Army Group Center, affected Stalingrad, and finally forced the attention of the Stavka back to the south. The objective of Operation Mars was simple. As the Rzhev meat grinder of 1942 had continued on and taken shape, there was a 100-mile-wide salient of Axis forces around the city of Rzhev. Of course, as the fighting had evolved since December of 1941, this salient pointed north rather than east. As this was the closest threat still lingering to Moscow, to leave it untested was foolish to Stalin's way of thinking. So as Operation Uranus was being planned out, Operation Mars, the encirclement of the Ninth Army, was also in its planning stage. Considering the results of Mars, some Soviet historians later on said, it was never meant to be a true operation, but rather to not only tie down the German forces of Army Group Center, but to make sure none of them could come to the rescue of General Paulus. And yes, that would be a side effect of Mars, no matter its outcome. But as Mars had double the number of tanks that Uranus did, it's hard to accept that this was a diversion only, as the number of tanks in any one spot normally determined who would come out on top. And though Uranus had 1.1 million men involved, directly and indirectly, Mars's 700,000 assigned troops was no small matter, even in Soviet Russia. And again, it was an operation to make Moscow that much safer. And lastly, it was Zhukov and Stalin himself watching over Mars. As Rzhev was on the northern end of Army Group Center's line, the idea was to pinch it off, surround it, and destroy the Axis forces therein. One Soviet attack would come from the immediate east of the German-controlled Rzhev area, from the Soviet Western Front. That front, controlled by General Konev, would send multiple armies towards Sikovia, about 30 miles due south of Rzhev. Meanwhile, the Kalinin Front, commanded by Colonel General Pukayev to the west and northwest of Rzhev, was to attack from at least 3 places. 2 from further west-northwest, and 1 directly north-northwest of Rzhev. When both fronts' advances pushed in, they would meet, and soon Rzhev and the Ninth Army would be trapped, just like Paulus's Sixth Army. Once the Ninth Army had surrendered, or was destroyed, Operation Jupiter would follow 2 weeks later. This would include the victorious Mars units, joined by 3 other fresh armies, as they would drive along the Moscow-Vyazma highway toward Smolensk. But they would stop short of that city, not that the Germans would know this, and then spread out to take the territory to the east of Smolensk, carving out a hunk of what was left of Army Group Center. After that, other fresh forces would take over and take control of the territory in Army Group Center's rear. Thus, that massive German force would be trapped, unable to move forward, unable to retreat. But Mars was the first tile that had to topple the city of Rzhev for the rest of this to fall into place. And yet, as foul weather had helped the Soviets save Moscow, it was now their turn to suffer from its effects. Mars, this Soviet multi-pronged attack, commenced on November 25th, before the sun rose, whereas Operation Uranus had started days before, on November 19th. But Mars required those extra days to get additional men and guns into place, which should have been a red flag, no pun intended, for the Soviets. The reason for this difficulty was the fog, snow, and resulting muddy ground. Still, what was to hand for Mars was finally in place, and the Soviet artillery started up that November 25th. Not that the crews knew if they had hit anything, not that their forward observers could tell them how to adjust their guns for better accuracy. They couldn't see anything either, due to the thick fog, which didn't matter, as the Germans had had almost a year to improve their defenses. Thus, the Soviet shells were missing, and what they were missing were rather impressive trenches and defensive works. Then the Soviet Third Shock Army, the most northern attack, but just northwest of Rzhev, slammed into the German line. The idea of them coming in first was to hopefully draw in other German units from the east and west. But the Third Shock Army found themselves having difficulty breaking through the lines, certainly as those lines were supported by the German 14th Motorized Rifle Division. The heavier attacks from the east and the west started up at the same time as each other, so both sides of the German defenders could not assist the other, but just after the northern attack. The 20th Army on the left flank and the 31st Army on the right flank of the Western Front hit the eastern side of the German salient, and though their artillery had done little damage, these units made progress. It was the same for the 22nd Army on the left flank and the 41st Army on the right flank of the Kalinin Front, coming at the salient from the west. The reason for their early success was that, although their artillery attacks had done little damage, it had forced the German defenders to go to ground. Back to the eastern side, the Soviet 31st Army, right flank, enjoyed initial success, but then the Germans recovered from the shelling. Soon the attacking Soviet 3 rifle divisions with 2 tank brigades started taking heavy losses, and the further they penetrated, the more their losses rose. However, the 20th Army, coming in on the 31st Army's left or southern flank, fared better. Its 1 rifle division and 2 tank brigades crossed the Vazazuva River and captured land on its western side. From there, the Soviets started widening their bridgehead instead of deepening it, which allowed the German artillery, now not having to pull back, to fire into their ranks. Seeing both sides of the eastern attacks, well, not stalled, but certainly not adhering to the timetable, Zhukov and the Western Front commander sent in their reserves on the second day of battle, November 26, which was 200 tanks, 30,000 men, and 10,000 cavalry. But the Germans had thoroughly scouted out the two roads that these units would have to use, and so as the Soviet reserves came on, they suffered heavy casualties from German artillery even before being able to clash with the enemy. Despite this, they pushed on, and in the afternoon they reached the Rzhev-Sikyova Railroad. Yet by now, the casualties of the three leading brigades was 50%. Stunned by this, Zhukov rested his men, but on November 28th, he told them to advance anew. By now, the German reserves for this area, the 9th Panzer Division, had reached the fighting and soon sent withering fire into the Soviet horsemen. Still, the Soviets pushed on and were able to rout the headquarters of 3 9th Army units. Further, 2 German artillery regiments were slaughtered outright. What was needed now for the Soviets was a strong infantry presence at the point of attack, but many of these men were still on the western bank of the Vazuza River. German artillery was keeping them there, and the Soviets did not have enough opposing artillery supporting their infantry. As the 9th Panzer rushed up from the south, they didn't attack the head of the Soviet thrust. No, rather, just behind it. They were trying to cut it off, then surround it, and then eliminate it. On the western side of the salient, the troops and tanks of the Kalinin Front, though not having as many men, fared better. The 22nd and 41st Armies crossed over in 2 places and used terrain not that well defended. Whether from luck or not, they hit a relative German weak point. This allowed them to rush towards the town of Belyi to start surrounding it. The Soviet attack to the north of Belyi, the 22nd Army, was doing better as it had weather-appropriate vehicles. Thus, the infantry was able to stay with the tanks. The units of the 41st Army, the southern attack of Belyi, did not. The northern attack had advanced 30 kilometers, the southern 20 kilometers. As for the southern attack, the German 146th Infantry Division was doing a stellar job of slowing them down, for these Germans knew that 3 panzer divisions were rushing up to help them from the south. They did not have to win outright, but merely to slow down the attackers. And on November 26th, some of those panzers reached the men of the 146th. Seeing this, and expecting more panzers, the local Soviet commander General Tarasov told the 22nd Army, the northern force, to try to encircle the Germans that were to the north of the town instead of attacking them directly, thinking he could wipe them out before the panzers got that far, so he would have at least one advance still making progress. This decision, however, slowed down his northern advance, and now the more southern attack was making greater headway despite the German reserves. In fact, they were soon able to surround the 7,000 men of the 83rd Rifle Division. But as for destroying these men, their artillery was hurting the Soviets more than being hurt. Meanwhile, on the eastern side of the salient, the Soviet 20th Army, left flank, had all but stopped their advance, or rather, had been stopped. The 9th Panzer was doing its job. Still, Zhukov, though knowing the supporting infantry was still back at the river, ordered all units to advance, which fed the Soviet leading units right into a German pincer, with the 27th Infantry Corps hitting them from the north and the 39th Panzer Corps attacking from the south. The result? One of the 2 Soviet tank brigades, a battalion of rifle, a motorcycle brigade, and some cavalry units became encircled. This could not be allowed to happen, for it would ruin the entire eastern attack, not to mention that Zhukov was in constant communication with the Western Front commander, Konev. So, on November 30th, Konev ordered the 6th Tank Brigade to break out of the circle, while the 100th Tank Brigade hit the German trap from the east, hoping this would loosen things up. As for the Soviet infantry, they still had no better luck advancing to help their comrades. The fighting here grew intense, and by December 1st, the 2 tank units were able to join, though both commanders of those units had been killed. As for the Soviet cavalry, They couldn't break out to the east, so turned around and did so to the west. They soon joined up with partisans, and they raided the salient for a month. But as for helping the Mars attack more directly, their time was over. Back to the western side of the salient, the German 41st Panzer Corps was reinforced by 3 additional panzer divisions. Before this, the 41st Panzer had to go over to the defensive, but now they had the manpower, in the form of tanks, to surround the Soviet forces who were trying to encircle them, those being the more southern of the 2 Soviet attacks. Seeing this, the Soviets tried to break out to the west, which allowed the panzers to then go on the offensive. 3 of the 5 Soviet brigades were now themselves trapped, so they switched over to the defensive, hoping for relief. But General Tarasov had already used up his reserves. There was no help coming. By now, both Soviet incursions into the salient's western side were stopped cold. The trapped Soviet men fought off attack after attack for days, but soon they were running out of everything. So their commander, Solomatin, on December 15th, ordered a desperate breakout. First, he wanted all of their vehicles destroyed to deny them to the Germans. Then he had his men come together. They formed up and simply charged to the west, fighting as they went. This overwhelmed the Germans in their way. Still, of those that had been trapped, 8,000 of the 12,000 men were now killed, wounded, or captured, and they had lost 150 tanks. As this more southern of the western attacks fell apart, the now lone northern force tried to pull back as well, but it was a repeat of their comrades to the south. Some made it out, most did not. Now, back on December 10th, Zhukov decided that the best way to help the men on the western side and his own eastern attack was by reinforcing the 20th Army, the more southern of the 2 eastern attacks, with the 5th Tank Corps and most of the 31st Army, and then ordering them to advance. But by now, not only did the Germans expect this, they had several additional panzer divisions in the area, with artillery and infantry support. Zhukov's attack came to nothing. It had started at 10 a.m. on December 11th and was stopped a few hours later. The Germans were now back in control of their salient. All Soviet troops still within it were either killed or had surrendered. The last 4,000 men, with over 100 tanks of Zhukov's last attack, were forced to surrender. German General Model, the 9th Army commander, had reacted brilliantly. Between his superior communications, his 350,000 men's experience, and certainly his transports, which the Soviets lacked in a large way, the Germans were able to shift men from non- or less threatened areas to those in need of reinforcements. The only thing Operation Mars had to show for itself was a few kilometers of captured territory on the western side of the German salient, just north of Belje. All told, the Soviets lost 1,600 tanks and suffered 330,000 casualties, again, dead, wounded, or captured. The Germans had suffered 40,000 casualties and an unknown number of lost or damaged tanks. But it was far less than the Russians. General Model was due some praise, and he would receive it, but what had been lost in this victory would affect Army Group Center in the future. As for Stalin, Mars liked him not, and as Uranus had gone much better, he and the Stavka would decide to build on that. And this decision would eventually undo the Eastern Front for the Axis forces. Mars was practically the end of the Rzhev meat grinder. The Soviets would focus on the south, the Germans, here, would hold, as if still driving towards Moscow was a possibility. It wasn't, and in March 1943, just 3 months later, General Model and Kluge, Army Group Center's commander, would decide to abandon the Rzhev salient. Greetings, everyone, from Central Virginia. So I would just like to take a moment and thank some new members and those who have donated. I didn't do it during the interview, and that kind of throws me off. So some of these might be repeats, but hey, you deserve it. You're special, and you're beautiful. So anyway, so is my latest members. Philip is at Mangold. Sorry about that, Philip. I tried to look it up. I got several different things, so I just made up something. Anyways, Jason is at Beckmere. Thank you very much, Jason. And John Strogas. So those are the latest members. They pay $5 a month. They get 2 extra episodes kind of behind the scenes. And I'm currently in late 42, early 43, about to be in 43 of the Battle in the Atlantic. So anyways, as far as donations, I'd like to thank in no particular order, Dr. Ahmed Huda. Thank you very much, sir. It is greatly appreciated. Peter Bischoff, who, Peter, I just got to say, you keep walking that dog, getting healthy and listening. You have to do both. You have to walk the dog. Okay, 3 things. Walk the dog, get healthy, and listen. Okay, there you go. There's your orders. Michael is at Piovoso. Thank you very much, Michael. Jordan Hewitt. Thank you, Jordan. Timothy Olert. Now, that name sounds familiar. Timothy, I think you've done something before. You've donated or become a member, but that name stands out to me. I don't know why. Greg Urquhart. Thank you very much, Greg. I appreciate it. Brett Van der Linder. Thank you very much, Brett. Felix, I think it's Mayer from Switzerland. Good luck with the health, and maybe get a dog and walk it every day like Peter and I do. I don't know. I'm not beautiful, but I'm no longer heavy, and it's all because of walking the dog. So just I'm not a doctor. This is not medical advice. Do not hold me to this. You can't sue me. Okay, but Felix, good luck with everything. Let's see here. Benjamin Fields also donated. Thank you, Benjamin. That you didn't ask for that. Ronald Vaught and Tony Dulele. So thank you very much, gentlemen. Thank you for the donations. It is greatly appreciated. So now that we touched on Army Group North, it's the siege of Leningrad. They tried to do something, it didn't work. The Soviets tried to do something, it didn't work. And we've seen kind of come to the end of the Rzhev meat grinder, because basically they were just going back and forth. And after you hear the battles over and over again, your eyes kind of go cross. So I kind of skipped over a lot of that. Not that hundreds of thousands of men, mostly Soviets, died. It was horrific. But I think that kind of pulls the narrative down, if I can be so cruel. So now we're back to the south, where we're going to have Operation Little Saturn, which is then going to set up attacks at Von Rez. I'm trying to remember how to say that. It's north of Stalingrad. And then, of course, that sets up the Battle of Kursk. So we're getting there, and we'll keep covering these operations, and we'll just watch Army Group South come apart, and then, of course, which affects Crimea as well. And then that affects the overall Eastern Front. And then at some point we'll stop. I'm not sure. And then we'll bring in the Americans, landing in North Africa, along with other allied forces, of course. And then we see how the war, slowly turns. Things like this never turn on a dime. It's always slowly. It's always, a gradual process where the other side is just getting more men to the front, or they have better fighting tactics or technology, or they're working better together. It's a gradual process, and you don't really notice it on one particular day. But when you look back, you're like, oh, yeah, I can see that now. But when you're in the middle, it's like life, right? When you're in the middle of it, you don't know if you're doing good or bad. You just know that you're still here. And that's what any of us can do. Just do the best you can with what you got. I really believe that's the secret to happiness. But again, you didn't ask. So I'm going to stop now. And I will see you as soon as I can with the next episode. I've got a couple of interviews coming up. I haven't done, besides the one I just did, I haven't done them in a while because it kind of slows down the process, but some really good books out there, and I don't want to miss out on those. Besides, they give me free copies. And so we'll sprinkle those in, and I'm going to have the gentleman, I use the word gentleman loosely, from the Warrior Next Door podcast come back on, and we're going to do another episode/video that you can see on YouTube. And so we got a lot of stuff coming up, and spring is sprung. So enjoy yourselves. Take care of yourself, walk your dog, and kiss your significant other. Take care, everyone.
From the creators of the popular science show with millions of YouTube subscribers comes the Minute Earth podcast. Every episode of the show dives deep into a science question you might not even know you had. But once you hear the answer, you'll want to share it with everyone you know. Why do rivers curve? Why did the T-Rex have such tiny arms? And why do so many more kids need glasses now than they used to? Spoiler alert, it isn't screen time. Our team of scientists digs into the research and breaks it down into a short, entertaining explanation, jam-packed with science facts and terrible puns. Subscribe to Minute Earth wherever you like to listen.